Alright, let's wrap up Chapter 30 and our look at our good buddies, the plants, with Concept 30.4. Human welfare depends greatly on seed plants. It's kind of difficult to overstate how important seed plants are to our world and our planet and human beings as a species. No group of plants is more important to human survival than seed plants. These plants are key sources of food, fuel, wood, products, medicine, and we heavily rely on them, and we have heavily relied on them for pretty much the entire existence of mankind. Our reliance on seed plants makes their preservation, particularly of their diversity, very crucial. So for example, when we think of seed plants, we oftentimes think of agricultural plants, and we'll find out that there are only a few agricultural plants that make up the vast majority of the food that we eat, but the plant diversity amongst seed plants is something that's very important as well, because there is a myriad of products that we get from these plants, and we are kind of doing damage to the ecosystem and the environment in a way that is causing many of these species to go extinct before we even classify them and find out how they might be useful to us as a whole. The vast majority of our food, like I said, in an agricultural setting, the vast majority of our food comes from angiosperms. Only 6 crops, wheat, rice, maize, potatoes, cassava, and sweet potatoes, yield 80% of the calories consumed by humans. So these 6 types or varieties of plants make up about 80% of the food calories that humans consume across the globe. Modern crops are products of relatively recent genetic changes resulting from artificial selection. If you were to go out in the wild and try to find the wheat and the corn and the potatoes that we raise on farms, you wouldn't find them. They don't exist out there in the wild. But the plants we raise on these farms are descendants of wild ancestors that we have changed over time via not natural selection but artificial selection through selective breeding. So many of these seed plants provide us, in addition to food, a wide variety of other products such as wood and lumber, of course, from trees used for fuel and paper and building materials. And then there are other things. We talked about these secondary compounds that can be very important for medications and other types of uses for humans. Even with the ability that we now have to produce a lot of chemicals in a laboratory without the use of natural products, still today in the US, about 25% of all the prescription medication drugs contain an active ingredient that comes from some sort of plant, and typically that is a seed plant of some kind. So you can see how important these plants are to us, and not just the few that we mention here, but the wide variety of plants found on our planet is very important as well. Here's a couple of good examples of some of those plant-derived medicines, and you might notice or recognize some of the various words here, some of the compounds like atropine and menthol and taxol. Some of these compounds come directly from different plant sources, and here's some of their uses over here. So for example, atropine, and whoops, excuse me, get to the right slide here. Atropine is an eye pupil dilator. Quinine is a malaria preventative. Menthol you've probably heard of in cough drops and things like that. So these are just a very short listing of some examples of products that come from plants, directly derived from plants that are used in medications, even in our modern society where we have the ability to create a lot of these chemicals perhaps unnaturally in a laboratory as opposed to taking them from the natural setting. And of course I mentioned that sometimes humans do things that are not very kind to other species. We do some damage to the environment around us. And although plants are certainly a renewable resource, if we manage forests and we manage other plant species, we can have almost a continuous supply of them. Plant diversity itself is not necessarily a renewable resource. Once we lose certain species, it's difficult to impossible, of course, to bring them back from the dead, to bring them back from extinction. And the main thing that causes this loss of plant diversity is habitat destruction. That's what's causing the extinction of a lot of different plant species. In the tropics, it says about 55,000 square kilometers are cleared every year, and at this rate, if we were to continue to clear the tropical forests and the rainforests and the like, at this rate the remaining tropical forests would be eliminated in virtually 200 years time. So I don't even want to think about the huge number of species that we would lose, and this would be a huge number of species that we don't even know about, that we have yet to classify, and some of those species may be beneficial to us. Some of those may contain certain compounds that would be beneficial, say, in the study or the fight against cancer or Alzheimer's or some of the horrible heart diseases that affect mankind. So loss of plant habitat is often accompanied by the loss of animal species that plants support as well, and we can't forget that. We wouldn't just be losing the plants, we would be losing the huge number of animals that rely on these plants in these particular habitats as well. If we were to continue at our current rate of habitat loss, about 50% of our species would become extinct within the next 100 to 200 years. And this would be an enormous loss. This would be on par, comparable to some of the other global mass extinctions that we've talked about, such as the mass extinctions that occurred at the Permian and the Cretaceous era. This would forever change the evolutionary history of not just land plants but animals as well. And so a lot of scientists will even tell you that we are in a new era in time, the era of human beings, where we are causing such radical changes to the environment that we are affecting which species go extinct and the rate of species that go extinct. The tropical rainforest may contain undiscovered medicinal compounds, as we have only explored the potential use of a small fraction of seed plants on Earth. And again, the vast majority of these species of plants that we would lose, we have yet to even study. So we don't even know what benefit they might be able to provide. We're going to study more about ecology and sustainability a little bit later in the semester, but again, as we have already mentioned, we have a great impact on the environment. Here's a good example. A satellite image from the year 2000 shows, this is in the Brazilian rainforest. You can already see clear-cut areas and roads through the tannish areas here. And then if you jump ahead to 2009, the same area, you can see that how much more of the forest has been lost just in the 9 years, that same photo taken there. And that's habitat that once it gets destroyed, it doesn't easily return back to its natural state. Even if we were to abandon these areas, it would take quite some time for nature to reclaim those areas. So we have a vast impact on the environment, and these seed plants we've been talking about are of such importance to us. The diversity of those seed plants we should do our best to try to maintain. So we're going to stop right there. That is chapter 30, kind of an overall view of the land plants, which would include the gymnosperms, which would be the naked seed plants like the conifers, and then the angiosperms, which would be the flowering seeded plants, pretty much all the other varieties of plants that you're familiar with. We're going to take a break right there. The next chapter is all about a very interesting group of living things called fungi, the fungus among us, and we will talk about them in chapter 31. So I'll see you in that chapter. Bye-bye.